Today's talk is titled Social Justice During the 2020 Pandemic and will be presented by Christine Fox. Kris Fox has been a member of this congregation since July 2015. She has served on various church committees and in the Cambria and San Simeon communities on food security issues. She is happily married to the love of her life, John Rohrbach. A native Wisconsinite, she counts Massachusetts, Switzerland, and now California as her second homes. Please welcome Kris Fox.
Good morning. When I was a young girl, we had a Mexican family move into our neighborhood. This was a bit unusual at the time. I don't think I knew any other Mexican families. I certainly had no Mexican classmates. In fact, our all-white, very conservative town had no people of color living within its confines. But during the 60s, the Green Giant processing plant in a neighboring town began to hire immigrant labor to help during the harvest. And we began to see more people, so unlike ourselves, moving to our town, a good place to find jobs in manufacturing when harvest season ended. One day, Maria, the child closest to me in age, asked me if she could come to our house for dinner. She was hungry, she said, and her family had no food at home. This family had at least 4 children, as I recall. Of course, my family fed her that evening, and even with our limited resources, got some food to her family. My father recounted this story to me recently. I had completely forgotten Maria and her family and the circumstances that brought her into our lives. I bring up this story because of the challenge we have before us to deal with the global pandemic and all that this entails for every aspect of our lives. More than ever, it is imperative to look beyond ourselves. The need for compassion towards people who came here under difficult circumstances and to recognize the sacrifices they make for their children's futures is not only relevant, but urgent. The pandemic has made striving for a foothold here in the United States even more difficult for many immigrant families. Low-income families are experiencing the slide from insufficient wages to almost certain poverty. In the April 26th issue of The Guardian, Robert Reich, Secretary of Labor under President Bill Clinton, describes how the COVID-19 pandemic shines a light on a new kind of class divide and its inequalities. He describes the 3 groups that are not getting what they need to survive the crisis. He calls the first group the essentials, who include healthcare workers, farm and food producers, home care and child workers, truck drivers and transit workers, sanitation workers, drugstore employees, and police officers, firefighters, and the military. He cites the lack of adequate protective gear, paid sick leave, health insurance, and child care. He suggests that these workers deserve hazard pay, and of course they do. Reich names the next group the unpaid, workers who have been furloughed or who have used up their paid leave. Many have lost their health insurance. Workers employed in personal service, such as in retail, restaurant, and hospitality work, have jobs that cannot be done remotely. The unpaid most need cash to feed their families and pay rent, and few have the emergency funds to cover 3 months of expenses, a modest suggestion of the length of time when the earliest isolation orders were given to when the last date will be fully up and running again. Reich posits that given the choice between feeding their families and endangering their health, many will take the latter. Reich describes the last group as the forgotten. This is the group for whom social distancing is nearly impossible. It includes prisoners, the undocumented in our communities, and those who are in jails awaiting decisions on their immigration status. It includes migrant workers living in crowded camps, the very people who help to supply our food. It includes Native American reservations, homeless shelters, and nursing homes. Underrepresented in Washington and in state capitals, these groups do not have the luxury of adequate testing and healthcare, or even places to isolate if they become infected. Reich notes that the essentials, the unpaid, and the forgotten are disproportionately Black, poor, Latino, and they are disproportionately becoming infected. I have chosen to focus on food security because of the need to help supply food in our own community. The Hispanic population has suffered the loss of jobs and livelihoods to a much greater extent than the rest of the community. Many families, because of their uncertain immigration status, are not eligible for government assistance. Some do not have adequate health care. And yet, this population keeps our town running by supplying many needed services. They are our backbone. When they suffer, so do we. In Cambria and San Simeon, individuals, businesses, and nonprofit organizations have stepped in to help provide these families with food. Since the first week of major layoffs in service industries, the group I am working with, a collaboration of individuals and a local service club, have been delivering food to over 70 families in Cambria and San Simeon. Because of the generosity of the community, we have recently added gift certificates for non-food necessities and increased the amount of food we can bring to each family. Many of you have generously contributed. Thank you. We now have enough financial support to continue to feed families through May and into June, and we may start delivering weekly soon. As one good deed inspires others, more individuals and organizations in our community are reaching out as well through supplying families with restaurant meals and hot food. Our school district is distributing grab-and-go meals for students' breakfasts and lunches, as are many school districts across the country. Fortunately for California families, on April 29th, Governor Newsom unveiled over $3 million in new funding to expand the state's Farm to Family program, a program that partners with 41 food banks serving all 58 counties. The governor also highlighted critical expansion of CalFresh and EBT programs to combat food insecurity for low-income Californians, including a new pandemic EBT program for children who receive free or reduced lunch and EBT for online purchasing. Putting food on the table during this pandemic is hard for families on the brink, said Governor Newsom. It's in that spirit that we're expanding our Farm to Family program while also working to connect low-income families with vital resources and financial support. We thank our farmers for stepping up to donate fresh produce to our food banks, and we want families struggling to access food to know we have your backs. As Unitarian Universalists, we are inspired by the world's major religions and by sacred teachings of all faiths. From these teachings, we take our cues about how to address poverty. The Old Testament points to a moral obligation to alleviate some of the causes of poverty, oppression, exploitation, and misfortune. In Deuteronomy, we read that the poor will always be with us, and to not withhold our help or to harden our hearts against them. In the New Testament, most notably the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, cite several examples of Jesus ministering to the poor and his exhortations to his followers to not forget them. Paul urges early Christians to be generous and to do good deeds, and to do them carefully. As for our Muslim friends and neighbors, the holy month of Ramadan has just begun, a time when Muslims are called to be thankful for blessings, while also remembering the plight of the hungry and needy by fasting from sunrise to sunset. In addition, the humanist perspective deeply imbues our understanding of the effects of poverty with the broader issue of human development, of people being free to live a life they value. Whatever our religious or humanitarian values are, as Unitarians, we are called to reach out to others to help. We must look at the world as it is. The ideal of promoting social justice can become a reality only when we do the little bit more that hurts, whether it is keeping our house cleaners and landscapers employed when they cannot come to work, or not turning away when we see someone standing on the street corner asking for food or for work so they can feed their families. This builds a foundation of compassion in our society that reflects how we are, in many ways, responsible to each other. Food security and the poverty and financial instability from which it arises should not be a political issue, but a humanitarian one, in which we deflect false dichotomies about who is worthy and who is not, of who should be helped or how. Sadly, this has become the norm in a political system in which everyone anxiously guards their own little slice of the pie. To underscore a difference in thinking, the UUSC's mission states that UUs are guided by the belief that all people have inherent worth and dignity. The UUSC advances human rights globally by partnering with affected communities who are confronting justice, mobilizing to challenge oppressive systems, and inspiring and sustaining spiritually grounded activism for justice. Our acts that promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations have deep meaning in our current age. My family never had much in the way of material goods or financial security. My parents' ability to model giving, even when it hurt, is a lesson that has come back to me over and again in my adult life. As an adult, my own search for meaning eventually led me to become a Unitarian Universalist. As Unitarian Universalist individuals, we are presented with choices that challenge our personal status quo. As a Unitarian Universalist congregation, we understand that social justice is not a cause. It is how we position ourselves in our community, in our world. Thank you.
Thank you, Kris. Normally, at this time, we receive offerings from our congregants.